I'm Patricia Ezechie, and this is Proactive Empowered Careers, a space for thinking about careers differently, not as something separate from who you are, but as an expression of you and the life you want to live. Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last episode, we talked about that quiet moment where everything looks fine on the outside and yet something inside you is asking a question. That moment where success doesn't quite feel like success. And one of the most common ways that experience shows up is what people often describe as feeling stuck. Not dramatically stuck, not in crisis, but something quieter than that. So today I want to explore that experience because feeling stuck is often misunderstood. It's not always a problem to fix. It's often something trying to tell you something. One of the most common things people say to me is this: I'm not unhappy exactly, but something doesn't feel right anymore. That feeling of being stuck. Not always dramatic, so it's not always about burnout or crisis, but it's not something that you can easily point to, just something feels off. It's a quiet, persistent sense that something isn't quite right anymore. You go to work, you perform, you deliver, you function, and yet somewhere underneath all that, there's a whisper. A low-level hum of disconnection and dissatisfaction. A sense that you've outgrown something, or perhaps something has outgrown you. And here's what I want to say right at the beginning. That feeling of stuckness is rarely about failure. More often than not, it's information. So let's slow this down a little and look more closely at what we mean when we say we feel stuck. Because the way we interpret that feeling really matters. We tend to interpret stuckness as something to fix, something that we need to get rid of, something we need to push through, something we need to eliminate. We might say things like, I just need motivation. I need discipline. I need clarity. I need to get my act together. And sometimes all those things are true. But often, stuckness isn't about effort. It's about misalignment. And in my experience, feeling stuck rarely means something is wrong with you. Very often, it simply means you've outgrown something. It's about being in a role, a rhythm, a context, or even an identity that no longer fits the person that you've become. And here's the tricky part. You might still be good at what you're doing. You might still be rewarded for it. You might still be respected for it, which makes that feeling even more confusing. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. And this is where something interesting starts to happen. One of the most common patterns I've seen in my work is this. People don't get stuck because they're failing. They get stuck because they're competent. They've grown, but the role they're in hasn't. They've adapted. They've succeeded. They've delivered. They've become known for something. And then slowly and quietly, they change. But the role doesn't. And that competence can keep you trapped in places that your identity has already grown from and left from. And that's an uncomfortable truth. But at the same time, it's also a liberating one. Because what that helps us do, that understanding that we're in a place that we've outgrown in terms of our identity, what it gives us is a reframe for stuckness. Because it allows us to see stuckness differently. Not as I'm broken, but I'm evolving. So if that's true, if stuckness isn't failure, then what is it? If you think about life more broadly, there are very few moments where change is neat and linear. More often, there's a period in between. Not where you were, and yet not yet where you're going. A kind of psychological corridor. And in this corridor, we can feel uncomfortable because it lacks certainty. But it's also where reflection happens. It's where integration happens. It's where identity shift happens. And career change, meaningful career change, almost always passes through this space. The problem is, we're rarely taught how to tolerate it. We're taught action, decision, momentum, but not to pause, not ambiguity, not the space where you don't know. We're not taught how to tolerate that. So when we feel stuck, we assume something is wrong, when actually something might be unfolding. And this isn't just an intellectual experience, this feeling of stuckness. It's emotional. Stuckness can show up as restlessness, irritability, envy, fatigue, boredom, anxiety, even low-level grief, and sometimes one or two of these things, and other times all at once. Because when something no longer fits, there is loss involved. Even if you choose to change, even if the next change is exciting, there is still a process of letting go. And letting go is rarely tidy. And it's rarely a comfortable experience. And then there's another layer that often sits quietly underneath all of this. Other people. Because your career doesn't just belong to you. It exists in relationship to your colleagues, managers, family, friends, reputation, expectations. And sometimes what keeps people stuck isn't uncertainty about themselves. It's the anticipated reaction from others. What will they think? What will this look like? What if I regret it? What if they think I'm doing something wrong? Because underneath all those feelings and those thoughts is belonging. Because as human beings, we're all relational. So any change that threatens belonging will naturally trigger hesitation. That doesn't mean the change is wrong. It just means that we're human. You're human. So when you put all that together, here's the reframe I want to offer. What if stuckness is a form of intelligence? Not cognitive intelligence, but more emotional and developmental intelligence. A signal that the current configuration of your life and career is no longer congruent to the person that you are. A signal that reflection is required. A signal that adaptation is coming or may be coming. And when you see it that way, the urgency that sometimes comes from feeling stuck softens. The shame that sometimes comes from feeling stuck and untethered reduces. And the curiosity increases because we've created space for it. And that leads to a different kind of question. Rather than asking, how do I get unstuck? Because sometimes you are stuck, truly stuck. But even then, stillness still carries information. So you might ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? And that question opens space. Space for nuance, space for honesty, space for self-observation. Because stuckness rarely arrives empty-handed. It brings clues, moments of envy, moments of energy, moments of dread, moments of curiosity, tiny data points if you just pay attention. So if that feeling of stuckness is arriving for you, rather than rushing to answer it, here's something simple you might try this week. Don't fix anything. Don't change anything. Just notice. When do you feel energized? When do you feel depleted? When do you feel most like yourself? And when do you feel like you're performing? No judgment, no conclusions, just noticing patterns. Because clarity often comes from observation before action. That's how it emerges. And this is why we come back to something I said at the beginning. This podcast isn't just about careers. It's about careers and the lives that hold those careers. Because stuckness is rarely just about tasks or roles. It's about identity, meaning, energy, values, timing, life stage, context. And when you widen the lens beyond job dissatisfaction, the experience becomes much more understandable and much more workable. So if you're in that space right now, I want to offer this. You are not behind, you are not weak, and you are not failing. You may simply be in a moment of transition, a moment of questioning, a moment where your internal world is catching up with your external one. And those moments, while uncomfortable, are often the beginning of change. Not always dramatic change, but meaningful change. The kind that unfolds slowly, thoughtfully, and humanly. In the next episode, we're going to go a little deeper into something connected to this. If stuckness is a signal, what exactly are you outgrowing? Roles? Expectations? Identities? Success definitions? We'll explore all of that together when we next meet. Until then, just notice and take care of yourself. This has been Proactive Empowered Careers. If today's episode resonated, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what comes next. And remember, your career isn't separate from who you are. It's an expression of you and the life you want to live.